There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioners' future. This is just one of them. Hey, it's Wednesday. We're back and welcome to another live stream. We are, as always, dialing into the future of work. Never going to get old, that one. I still love that. So thanks again for joining us. We've got a great show coming up for you this week. We are diving into the prospect of cities, and we're looking at the future of cities and the future of skills. We're going to start by thinking about London. It's some really incredible statistics we're going to walk you through about changes of the City of London. But before we do that, usual story, got a couple of bits of housekeeping. I've got another live stream for you coming up on Friday if you fancy it. We're doing another piece dialing into the future of work. Interestingly, we've got a CEO, a CFO, and a non-executive director all talking about their experience, about how they're thinking about the future of their organization, in particular what they're thinking about doing there with their office space and how they're managing coming out of lockdown and going into the pandemic or the post-pandemic world. That's on Friday morning, 11:30. It's actually going to be run from the same channel, actually. So same URL. I'll send it out for you. You can see it in the link, but it'd be great to have you on. That's being sponsored by Hoggett Bowers. Talking of sponsors, How the Devil Are Treble 3. Well, they're doing amazing stuff as always. You remember these guys. They've been with us for 10 years. Anything that you need when it comes to digital print, websites, the whole ball of wax, these are the guys for you. treble3.co.uk. They've been doing some really interesting stuff. Actually, I saw this was up on their Facebook page this week, some stuff they've been doing around point of sale and point of information. So not just physical stuff, but digital implementation too. Usual stuff, signage, and you know they do the whole stage stuff for the rise of the human. So treble3.co.uk for all of your digital print and web needs. They've been fantastic in looking after us all this time. Give them a shout if you need anything along those lines. So let's get into London. Fantastic city of London, amazing city. Hundreds of years it has been the epicenter of finance, of business, of tourism until now. And things are changing. Things are dramatically changing. The thing that caught my interest, actually, researching this show is just I wanted to pull some statistics together for what's been going on in London. And I didn't have to look too hard because I found this amazing article from The Standard, which is from a week ago, talking about the challenge faced by the City of London, the biggest economic crisis in generations. And just looking at some of the statistics for you, let's bring those into a fresh relief for you. So 88% of people surveyed by The Standard are fearful of going on public transport. Tourism is down by 96%. So 96% down on tourism this year. The statistic that blew me away was looking in particular at Canary Wharf as an area in terms of office space. And out of 120,000 workers, office workers, only 7,000 of them have returned to work. So 94% of the workforce are staying at home. So you can imagine the kind of impact that this has had. And I was kind of like trying to figure out, so what's behind that number? Part of the number, I guess it's kind of logical when you think about it, is just the logistical challenge, because, and this is why Canary Wharf, I guess, has been hit so hard, is if you think about all of the high-rise buildings in Canary Wharf, and then you look at the complex situation or the nightmare challenge presented to you by the elevator, where actually to social distance in an elevator, that means that typically you can only take one person up at a time. So people have been doing these ridiculous maths about taking, sort of up to 7 days to bring in a day's worth of office workers into the organization, into your office building. So clearly something's got to change. And yes, of course, social distancing will change, but also I think it's giving lots of employers time an opportunity to think about their real estate and their space. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce you to today's guest, actually. So joining me is Toby Babb, CEO of Harrington Starr, who I guess you started out life as a financial services, a financial specialist recruitment agency, but I know you do tech and you do sales and you do all sorts of things like that. So Toby, I'd love it if you could just introduce yourself and Harrington Starr, but also talk about some of the challenges that you've seen from your clients when it comes to offices in London, and I'm sure it's applicable to all big cities. So Toby, welcome, and tell us a bit more about yourself.
Dave, lovely to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me on. So yeah, as I say, Toby Babb, we've just celebrated 10 years of launching the business. Harrington Starr is a fintech recruiter. We also have a company called North Star, which looks after the data, cyber, and tech sales markets. We have offices here in London and New York, so two of the areas which you're probably talking about, which have been relatively relatively hit by all of this crisis. And I think it's a really interesting point that you talk about with regards to London as a whole and everything we're seeing and how our customers have responded to it. There's been by and large, working with tech businesses, a relative BAU to it, with risk of talking with no empathy to the situation. But I've been holding podcasts and videos with I think 50 leaders in fintech companies over the last 100 days, and almost universally they're embarrassed to say that it's been running particularly easily for them. They've got developers as the vast majority of a number of their companies, and this is like what we walk out with our computers and we come back when we're told to come back. Is it going to change how they work? I think that do I see everyone being completely remote forevermore? Absolutely not. And I think we've spoken about this in the past. What I'm almost certain of is a far more blended model, and people being in and out, and probably impacts on real estate. You mentioned Canary Wharf there. I'm amazed that there's even people in there at that sort of level. It must be security walking empty streets at the moment, looking after it, because the biggest issue to me seems to be getting people up and down. We're now probably a third of our office have come back today, and we're gradually getting people back into the office. We're on the 7th floor of a building, and it is painful getting people single file into a set of elevators. If you look at Canary Wharf with the sheer numbers that they've got, and in some of those buildings, it's just you can't work it like that. You can't have one person in a lift in those sort of sizes of 30-story buildings plus.
No, exactly. And you've got to think, though, that somebody's sitting and doing the maths and they're looking at the cost of that real estate and the challenges that they've been through. And even if if you read between the lines of what the UK government are saying, I think increasingly they're going to want to push people back into work. They're going to want that economy to get going. But people will be sort of thinking, well, actually, do we need these big towers of sort of glass and steel as our shop window? And actually, wouldn't we be better served by maybe we're going to still need a central London location, and maybe instead of the whole building, we'll have a couple of floors or whatever. They must be thinking about that. It just changes so much for people.
Oh, I think there's definitely that sort of thought, isn't there? There's a number of I think very, very early on in this, there were big corporations who were talking about this and questioning. I think Barclays very early on in the whole process sort of went to say, look, we will be thinking a whole real estate solution to this. It's also interesting having conversations with these guys because very few of the tech businesses, particularly fintech businesses that we have, are purely London based. So they're also seeing it as a sort of spread across the world. And I was speaking to someone in Israel yesterday, someone who's got offices in Hong Kong today. And again, the interesting bit for me is everyone was envious of the situation in Hong Kong. They're just talking about some localized lockdowns over there coming back into it as people have come back, to normality. So, whilst yesterday's headlines all said we'll have a vaccine by Christmas and everything will be all right, I think it will be. I would be very surprised if a BAU came back, this year with everyone cramming into, glass and steel structures in Canary Wharf in a hurry.
No, exactly. And certainly, I mean, the conversations I've been having, support that. There's this sort of whole concept of hybrid, which I think becomes important. And also this sense that, you kind of need to provide for a real broad spectrum of, some people want to be in the office or will need to be in the office every day. Some people will never want to go in the office. And in between, there's lots of people who would say, well, actually, I only want to be there when I need to be there. Or maybe it doesn't need to be an office in Canary Wharf anymore. Maybe it could be an office in my high street, as long as I've got connectivity. And that whole sort of, you got to think people like, WeWork and Regus, who I would guess probably struggled at the beginning of this, but actually may well see themselves as part of the solution. Are you sort of hearing about those kinds of guys in your conversations?
Yeah, I think exactly the same sort of thing. That we know that there was quite publicised issues for both of those businesses, but particularly WeWork before the crisis. And I'm involved in numerous sort of WhatsApp groups with various business leaders, and I think there was a sort of genuine belief that everyone would boycott it, and they dealt appallingly badly with the situation at the start of it. That said, as we see a more fragmented workplace, and people having that little bit more flexibility around how they do their work and where they do it from, I'd say it absolutely plays into their hands. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see a fairly significant resurgence of both of those businesses in the coming weeks or months, certainly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, what I'd love to see, and we're going to be talking about this more in an upcoming show, actually, is this sort of decentralization or move away from the, and it's not just London, it's all of the big cities where you kind of have to be by this or close to the city or accessible to the city to be able to get the jobs you want. So it brings in all the money, also drives up the cost of accommodation and all that sort of stuff. But actually, it gives us the opportunity. If employers can start to think about a more decentralized workforce, does it matter that I'm not, accessible to London? Does it matter if I'm not even in the same country as my employer? All of these things start to become possible. And, just very selfishly from a UK perspective, if you look at the disparity between cities like London and, great cities like Newcastle and Birmingham, Manchester, and even smaller cities and towns, I grew up in Derby and, all these sorts of places, the opportunity becomes that actually we can do great things. I mean, I'm on the board of a company who's based up in the Northeast, and we do a lot of stuff around data science and Internet of Things. And it's a nightmare trying to find skills that are, available locally. So it creates an opportunity not just for them to be able to recruit in a broader market, but also it might be there'll be more local talent if we could start to think in that way.
Yeah, I think there's.
Go on.
Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
I was just going to ask.
I was just thinking it.
No, you first. After you. No. I'm only going to
right.
open it up for you. So you do it. You tell us what your clients are doing.
So look, just to come back to that point there about London as a hub, and whether there's we're going to see people spread out a little bit more and people come into it only for the for the dollar, so to speak. There's also a massive social side of this as well, and I think people have come to London for the Dick Whittington story of streets being paved with gold and all that sort of thing, but predominantly as well, it's the adventure, isn't it? There's people who flock to London as a place to work from all over the world because of the buzz, because of the hype. Exactly the same in New York, and it isn't just because of the additional earnings, because basically those earnings go go as quickly as they come living in a place like London. So there's two things at play here. One of which is just do people come to London to make their fortune, or do they come there because they're looking for an experience and to move away from living in the middle of nowhere with their family and having that big adventure. And I don't think that's going to go away in a hurry. But I do think in terms of finding talent in a place like the Northeast, for example, the remote side of things works two ways. The Northeast will suddenly be able to open that up to the rest of the country. And they might have someone in Cornwall who can work for their business, if they can grab that remote working. The big thing is, and this is a very interesting problem that I'm hearing from a number of CEOs, is actually bringing people back into the office, because you said there will be people who don't want to come back into the office. That's without question, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right thing for the employer, or the right thing for them, or the right thing for them. It's just easy. And there's this very interesting sort of almost Shawshank, as I call it, reaction of people being institutionalized at the moment. Into when it first went out, everyone said, "I can't work from home. This is terrible." And then when it comes back 4 months later, they've got used to it, and they have a fear of going back into the office and being around people, not necessarily because of COVID, but because they just become institutionalized in a different way of doing things. And so fear becomes this irrational thing about whether it's actually there. And this is where I think people come in and they start to taste a little bit of it. And we've had people come in once and twice. And when they come in once and twice, they remember all the things they loved about the office, and they loved being around colleagues, and the benefits they had of talking to each other and bouncing ideas off each other. And the sales floor, as I've got out there, people who are passing leads to each other, et cetera, et cetera. There's certain things that are irreplaceable. And then, there are people there who want who have this issue about culture. They want to build cultures within an organization, and part of that is around being around people. And then when you've got people who are saying, "But I'm perfectly happy coding off in my my house and not ever having to see someone again," it doesn't necessarily help that culture grow. And that's something which I think certain clients of mine are struggling with, how they actually justify bringing people back into their organizations. And it's, that there are people there who are digging their heels in and saying, hell no, we won't go. And it's interesting.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think the whole point, question about how you grow and nurture a culture whilst dispersed is really interesting, and we're seeing lots of conversations about that. And again, we're in the middle of all of this now, and that always makes it difficult, because I do think coming out of this is this sort of, the hybrid, and the hybrid will be a different blend for you as it will be for me, based on who you are as an individual and your organization, your industry, and blah, 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 blah. But it is about trying to provide that sort of epicenter of what you do and who you are, and then allowing people to go away based on that. I think, what we're seeing in retail, and certainly what we're seeing a bit in hospitality, I think, is that fear factor. So the customers are fearful about coming out for the first time, but if they have a good experience, then that tends to change, and that tends to say, well, actually it was okay, brilliant, so we might do that again. And I wonder if the same will be true of offices. But I think the challenge really is for people to build a very different approach to culture, but also a very different approach to skills as well. So I think, and let's play to the stereotype of the developer sat in a dark room somewhere. To them, and I have to say, I relate to that a little bit. The thought of having to drag my sorry backside, out into the real world, that's hard work. I'll have to get dressed. I might have to, clean myself up a bit. But that's equally important too. But it does require a very different set of skills, and I wonder if we could, perhaps come back to the sort of the opportunity for offices and cities later on, maybe. But I'm really interested in talking about the difference that you're seeing now in what your clients are looking for when it comes to the kind of skills that they're looking for in people, the kind of roles as well. Have you seen a shift as we sort of move through this in terms of what people are looking for?
Yeah, absolutely, and there's ongoing shifts on a weekly basis as well. So you have, let's start with the roles aspect. There is, we deal with tech and all areas of it, and we have teams lined up in vertical form. So we have people who focus on developers, other people who look at application and infrastructure and networks and DevOps. There are other people who look at business analysts and project managers, and other people who look at sales. And it's been really interesting to see hotspots at various different stages across the business. So as you'd probably imagine, cybersecurity has been really prevalent all the way through this. Development has been something which, again, has, probably because it can be managed remotely far easier than anywhere else, has been very, very, very in high demand all the way through it. Same with support and infrastructure. As you're moving people out and having remote teams that need to be supported in a completely different way, there's been a premium on there. Project management and business analysis probably hit harder than other areas, and again a little resurgence over that over recent weeks. Say it quietly because it's not fully back yet. And sales was almost immediately cut off, and that was a genuine stranglehold. So people pulled back on sales budgets in tech companies, and then all of a sudden we've seen the taps being let off that in quite a prolific way, and I anticipate that happening even further. There is no way you can have an organization without a sales team operating efficiently for more than 4 months and expect to hit the targets which you need to hit. So we're starting to see that actually we need to invest in that. People are buying. They needed to see that. Is everyone going to stop and wait, or are people doing? In our space, for fintech in particular, there's a genuine need for people to spark. I mean, I've seen businesses that have doubled and trebled in size over this period, this 4 months, who've enjoyed massive growth over the period. In terms of the second part of your question, which is a little bit about the sort of specific skills and I guess character-based skills that people have needed, rather than the technical side of it. Again, I think it's been people who've been client-facing, people who are able to communicate, articulate, and provide real value to propositions. People who are there and just monkey see, monkey do, probably haven't been as in high demand as people there who are going to say, right, let's have a look at a problem, let's analyze this issue, let's add the human part of this. I know you always talk about man and machine.
Yeah.
I think the premium is going to be for a long time in technology is people who have the ability to combine and humanize technology in its core form, and that's a real skill set, because there is a number of technologists who are very, very insular, who don't necessarily translate particularly well, tech problems and the solutions to it, and those who can genuinely understand the issue and the consumer issue in particular, and then provide solutions to that, are going to be a continued. They always have been, but even more so now. I think it's going to be in higher and higher demand. Real
Yeah.
commercial technologist is probably how I best call it.
Yeah, no, it's funny you should say that. Gary and I, and Gary will be kicking himself now, because Gary's a frequent contributor on the show, but we were kicking an email around. He sent me this sort of long thread, bizarrely at like 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I didn't read it then, just to be clear. He's increasingly, and he's right. He's worried about this tech-centric, tech-first world, and as we come out of this experience, we talked a little bit about it last week with Laura Willis from Shine Offline, about, we're so reliant now on the technology, we often forget the human part of the experience. And I was a bit nervous about that sort of conversation, because what I don't want to do is to say, actually, the technology is irrelevant because it's all about the human experience. Well, actually, the technology makes that possible, right? So let's not forget it. And I think what's so important for us now is to develop these sort of human first experiences, is how Gary was calling it, but it speaks to your sort of commercial technologists, someone who is, not a nerd or a geek necessarily like me, but just gets the power of technology and can use that to get that job done, whatever that job might be. They just rock the technology. They present themselves well. They manage their way around it. And I think, if I was an employer, and if I always have this sort of conversation about if I was a Microsoft or a Google or a Mitchell and Butlers or whoever, I'd be looking for someone who just rocks this stuff, right? Who just gets it, who can build a brand, because what I really want them to do is, and this is the point I think about the commercial technologist, is they can focus on, the human end of the equation, because they've got the technology under control. And I think that's going to be a really important thing to develop out of this. And it's interesting, because I think as we come out of this, I had a conversation earlier today, and it's like, well, so we're done with Zoom calls now, because we're going to go back to, well, no, hang on, we might, have a face-to-face meeting, but actually predominantly our meetings should be like this, and we should be running them differently, and we need people who can make that happen. And so I think that's going to be,
particularly with the international travel aspect of it. Sorry to cut over there, but I think there's when you think about how much is spent, how much time's lost from seeing executives jet all over the world for half-hour meetings. I mean, I know a number of people in banks who will go out to New York and back in a day for a meeting, and just the inefficiency of that is extraordinary, right? And there, of course, is benefit to face-to-face, but it doesn't have to all be face-to-face.
But it's not all the time.
That's going to be one of the great legacies to all of this will be, people's ability to understand that they can communicate well over Zoom, Skype, whatever it may be.
Yeah, no, I really hope so. This sort of live stream I'm doing on Friday, there's a non-exec director who's on the panel, and she asked this brilliant question of me, right? And it floored me, because I've got to go and think about it before Friday. She was like, well, why didn't we do this before? And I sort of, in my heart, I know why we didn't do this before, because we couldn't be bothered. If I'm really honest, is what I think the answer to that is, or we couldn't, that sort of uncomfortable feeling that, I don't know, maybe you had, I certainly had a little bit to start with, which was the whole thing about video calls. And, you and I are used to a world of telephone conferences, because that was what there was when we started, right? And it's really easy just to do a con call, and we've had those con calls with lots of people and all that. But that step into video, that first step, was a bit like awkward and uncomfortable. And now, I would much rather do a video call than a telephone call. I'd much rather do
absolutely.
that. And so maybe there's that piece about inertia that's really important to get people through. But beyond that, I can't put my finger on why. It's so obvious that this is the right thing to do. And I did, I work for an organisation where I'm not sure that we flew out for a day's meeting, but probably not far off. International organisation, and I'm thinking, of a period of my life where I spent a lot of that on a plane. And as nice as that is, and as fun as that is, it also nearly kills you after a while.
It does.
But those organisations, I hope now, are realising that this becomes okay. And actually,
Yeah.
and the other bit I think is important about what you said is to really cherish the time that you do choose to be face to face, and whether that's
Mm.
the fact that I've gone into London for the day or I've flown to New York for a meeting. I think hopefully it means that you will prioritize that experience. If we're going to have everybody together, then let's make it a really good use of our time. Let's make a real push to make sure that it's a fulfilling experience, both socially and professionally, because I think that's what I'm seeing as the big loss. One of the big losses of this world is the inconsequential social connection, and inconsequential at the time. You don't notice it. It's me and you standing, waiting to get a coffee or passing each other
Mm.
in the corridor, and I've not seen you for a week or whatever. Those things are actually really crucial to us being efficient and effective, working as a team or working in an organization. And so
Yeah.
let's find a way to have those again without, you can't force them, right? Toby, Dave, go and stand over the coffee machine and talk to our friend. It doesn't work like that either, right? But finding a way to make them happen, and when they do, really celebrate them and really engage with them. I think that becomes crucial for organizations going
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, I think and I've seen it today. As I say, that there's been more people back in at any other stage today in the office than we've had all the way through this, there's those bits. There's the interactions and just I was speaking to one of the guys earlier on who just heard that something out the corner of his ear, and spoke to the guys and helped him out, which he wouldn't have been able to do if someone's just doing that at home.
Yeah.
It's a small thing, but but they combine to make big things. It's the just the sort of camaraderie and buzz and hearing that sort of noise around it is something there which adds value. On the flip side, it's a distraction, at various stages.
Yeah.
So it's what tasks you need to do at what sort of stage that allows you to focus. That I think is going to be really important. It's recognizing, as we say all the way through this, the great legacy will be this ability to work the way that suits at the right sort of stage that individual to get maximum productivity, and that's what it's all about, right? It's about how do we increase productivity here to make sure people are playing at their absolute maximum and their optimum all the way through it.
No, and also I think the other thing is as part of catering for that, we've got to be able to allow people who either are in the room or out of the room to receive the same treatment and the same experience. And I think that's a lesson. I think we're walking into this lesson now as some of us go back to the office and some of us will still be remote. It's being mindful enough about, I know what it was like to be remote, and how do I provide that great? You must have had this experience. I can't tell you the number of times I've had either video calls or conference calls, and I'm the only guy dialing in, so they haven't even bothered to use the telephone system that's provided for them in the office. There's one bloke who's got his phone on speaker. Do you know what I mean? And I'm dialing in on that, and it's just such a terrible experience. Or there are some people in the room and they've all got printouts and you're remote and you haven't got a printout, and it's just like, seriously, it's the 21st century. We've solved these problems, but it does require a human being to think about it, at the beginning of the meeting. Think, Toby's dialing in, so how do we make sure that Toby has a good experience? Or we've got all of these facilities. That was always the thing, working for tech firms. They'd spend, hundreds of thousands of pounds on, devices that would enable a great, in-room experience, but nobody could be bothered to plug them in or turn them on. These are the things I think we've got to make sure that as we go back to the office, that we continue to be mindful that we need to provide a consistent experience, whether you're in or out of the room, and make that happen. The good news, I guess, is that we've all learnt a bit more about the experience ourselves, and we have perhaps a bit more empathy, when you are remote, that actually, hang on a minute, Toby's remote, what can we do to make his experience good? Or let's make sure that we think about this before the meeting, and that he has the material that we're going to look at. Those are the things.
There's been some wonderful examples, I think, all the way through that. I think if you told me 4 months ago that you were going to work in a world where none of your clients are going to be in the office for the next 4 months, and no one's going to be able to physically meet for that sort of period, I'd have thought that we won't do any business whatsoever.
Yeah.
But companies have grown, companies have hired, they've got in some instances more people that have never met each other in person working for them than they have actually in their teams at the moment, and I find that extraordinary and mind-blowing. And there's some companies out there I think have done some absolutely exceptional work at making sure that their teams are connected, that they've created world-class
Yeah.
onboarding experiences for people who come into that team, that they're connecting them with the rest of the business. And I think when those people go back into the office and they physically meet for the first time, it will be that they've already been part. It will make that sort of actual physical onboarding so much better of a better experience than going into work on the first day not having known
Yeah.
having known no one, etc., etc. It's been really, really good, and I've seen innovation in its absolute best in terms of how people have thought about this, gone through onboarding processes, gone through interviewing processes, taken people on, invested, and those who've rolled the dice and got ahead of the crowd here have enabled themselves to find talent that they'd never have been able to get at any other stage. And this, the big theme of my podcast that I've been doing all the way through this has been opportunities, and how people have turned negative into a positive. Because you only have to look at the Daily Mail or the BBC every single day to see doom and gloom and negativity.
Yeah.
But from this, I think the responsibility has been to say, how can you turn this negative into a positive, and how do you maximize all of these opportunities that are out there at the moment to change things and change them for the better.
No, exactly, and I love that. I mean, to your point, it's really easy to find out who's doing it wrong and where all the mistakes are. It's really hard to find out, the stories about who's doing it right. So I'm just conscious of time, and I want to leave on three things actually. So the first is you talk about your podcast a lot, and I know because I've been on them. Where would people find them, Toby, if they wanted to look into them?
So if you wherever you get your podcast, you can look at FinTech Focus TV. If you go onto YouTube, where we've got most of them there's Harrington Star TV, which has got FinTech Focus TV as the channel in there. So yeah, hopefully you go there and have some fun with it. That's what we're trying to do with them all. Yours will be out soon as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'll drop a link into those in the comments below. And then second, always like to sort of leave with a couple of things for the audience. And so if I could just put on you, Toby, to think in two different perspectives. One, if I'm an employer looking to recruit someone, what advice would you give for employers finding talent in today's market? And then second, for candidates, people who are looking to be recruited, what would be the one thing that would be the best thing for them to do to maximize their chances of finding someone? So employers and then employees, if that's okay.
Yeah, really, really, really interesting on both of those. Look, if you're an employer, I think the predominant call here is all about procrastination. There's people there who are thinking, do I hire? Is it the right time to? What I'll say is, look, you'll know that, and you'll know your cash positions and everything like that. But if you can, right now, I think there's never been a better time to go out there and see exceptional talent and attract them to your business with the right proposition. And you don't have to wait until this is all all over, and you're back in offices to get great people coming into your business. So I think my advice to employers naturally is to go for it and to make the most of the opportunity out there to increase your team with really good people at the moment. For employees, people who are potentially looking out there, it is competitive. Without question, it's competitive at the moment. So the key thing is to make sure you're standing out from the crowd. So how are you going to approach your CV to that particular role? How are you looking at the job spec and making sure it is absolutely on point and you're showing your skill set for it? How are you going to make sure you prepare and provide showing that you've done your homework more than anyone else who's going into that interview process, that you know the opportunities, you know why you want to work there, and how are you going to show that your skill set adds real value, not only to what they're looking for now, but what more you can add to that particular employer as well. And I think if you can do that, you've got the opportunity to stand out above a competitive market.
Oh, that's brilliant, Toby, and that's great insight, and especially from someone like you who not only and take this in the right way. Clearly, you've been around a long time, but also you've got such a broad perspective as well. So I mean, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out to spend with us, Toby. So thanks so much, and we perhaps come back on. In a couple of months when things start to be really interesting, because it's such a weird time right now, being sort of summer and some people are away and other people aren't, and all that sort of stuff. But when things are really, I guess. I can't even say back to normal, but when we're in the autumn, when people are a bit more into this space, it'd be really good if we get you back and have that conversation.
I would absolutely love that. No problem at all.
You're a star. Thanks, Toby. So that's pretty much it for us this week. Thanks again for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you found value in the conversation, it'd be lovely if we could have you along. Maybe get a like from you if you enjoyed today's conversation. Certainly would love to get your subscription, and also that whole thing about ringing the bell so you get notified next time we go live. If you're around on Friday at 11:30 in the morning, it would be great to see you then. That's it for this week. We're going to be back next week, hopefully with a conversation a bit more looking at the sort of the opportunity for cities away from the big towns, away from the big cities like London, the opportunity out for the regions and the suburbs. That would be a great conversation. That's next week. We'll see you then. Thanks so much for joining. Thank you.
There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioners' future. This is just one of them.